Hey, so I realize this topic is not exactly Christmassy, but is kind of fun if your sense of humor is dark, like mine. So anyway, I keep coming across these stories about how, when the Supreme Court in 2023 made their ruling saying that you can't factor in race in terms of, college admissions. So that basically strikes down affirmative action in colleges. So after that, I'll get all these different articles popping up about that impacting how many black students get into, certain colleges. And the sort of subsequent outrage. And then there's so many quotes that are just wrong. Like they just say things that are false and they don't realize how wrong they are. So I thought together we would go through one of these articles that popped up in my feed and we would explore its varying degrees of erroneousness. Okay, so let me bring you over here. So yes, the drop in black students at elite colleges sparks concerns among current students. Okay, now here we are. I already highlighted the stuff that I think is important for us to look at and have fun with. But first we're looking at Wharton, who's president of UNC Club Cis to Cis, which assists black women in achieving academic and personal success. And before we go on, let me just say that I bet you there is no equivalent uh, organization for white women to get together. But anyway, she says, quote, I've been taught from a very young age the kind of realities of being a young black American girl in this country, and knowing that there aren't going to be spaces that are just laid out for us where we are accepted. And I am proud to be a black American person who comes from a legacy of paving those spaces on our own and demanding that we have a place at this university, because we do. Okay, now, when you look at that and what she's saying, it's like, nobody said that you didn't have a space at the university. What they said was that you would have the same space as anyone else, which is to say that you would be chosen on the basis of your merit and the basis of your academic success. And they would even factor in things like intergenerational hardship. If your parents didn't go to college, if you were suffering financially, they can still factor those things in, but they don't say on the basis of your race that you have preference. It's a very different thing. And as far as spaces that are just laid out for us. I mean, I'm not really sure what she means other than direct entrance into university. But I mean, the spaces like Cis to Cis, the group for black women only, because that seems like a pretty exclusive space that isn't really, I guess, paralleled amongst other racial groups. So you could actually make the argument that, in fact, there's a benefit in terms of spaces, racial spaces, if you are a black woman that you wouldn't have access to if you were not. So, I mean, I realize that's inserting some data into a very opinionated piece, but let's just keep doing that and see how this goes. All right, so we're scrolling down here. I've got this next one. She says, this is Jasuka, um, who fears that the numbers of incoming black students will continue to dip. She says, what we've seen is there are people who come from marginalized backgrounds, whose parents may not have had an education. They come from places where their schools are disinvested from. If they feel like they are going to a university where they feel like their race will be weaponized against them, yet again, they may not want to come. Your race is not being weaponized against you. That is not, the Supreme Court of the United States did not say, we are going to ban black people from attending colleges or universities. Did not happen. They did not say, we're going to make it hard for, this one racial group to get into university. Did not happen. There is no oppression here. This is not about being oppressed. This is about failing to oppress other racial groups, right? Because that was the issue with the way that affirmative action works, right? If you give one group on the basis of race an advantage in admission, you by default then give other racial groups a harder time getting in. You affect the other groups in a negative way. You discriminate against them. So Asian students, white students were less able to get in. They would have lost their spots if they were equally qualified with a black individual. That isn't moral. And isn't lawful according to the Supreme Court. So that's what actually happened. So it isn't it isn't accurate to say that their race is going to be weaponized against them yet again. That's just blatantly false. No one's weaponizing your race against you. You've just got it in your head that you're oppressed and you're a victim. And in our modern society, like, there's something of prestige that comes with victimhood. And also, I think that on an individual level, because like we're all flawed, we like the idea that we can blame somebody else for any circumstance that we're in. You know, if my life isn't better than it is, it's because of somebody else, because somebody else stepped in to make it that way. And we do this to a lot of like Black young people. I think it's really kind of tragic when we tell them that the entire country is set up against them. There's a system of institutional oppression that doesn't actually exist that will prevent them from ever getting anywhere, because it convinces them that there's no reason to try, because you know they don't have the same opportunities. And honestly and candidly, the opposite is true. We have so many opportunities available for people who are Black specifically. We have scholarships specifically set up for people, you know, when that is the only qualifier. So I don't think it's, not only is it not fair to say that their race has been weaponized against them and that there's this, you know, system of oppression, like literally the opposite is true. Just is not the case. It just isn't. Like, I'm sorry, the facts are against you. Just one thing I noticed is that with the numbers dropping off of Black students attending, I realize, hey, on the athletic side, there wasn't a drop off. Well, yeah, because they're getting in on academic scholarships where they actually already had the merit. So what this is actually affecting is going to be the people who got into positions that they did not qualify for. So those on the athletic side were already qualifying for those positions at higher rates than other racial groups. Is actually, you know, for a lot of these different sports, like there are like physical differences between the races that make a lot of sense. But anyway, when it comes to academics, it's like, okay, if you're like qualified, then you should get in. And this has like ramifications down the line. Like, you see that those who actually, I saw the data years ago, and I don't know if I can dig it up, but I do know that those who get in on these sort of affirmative action basis are less likely to complete their studies. They're more likely to drop out, and because if you're not qualified for something, you're going to struggle at the class and you're going to get frustrated. But then, more importantly, at least on a bigger scale, not so much on the individual scale, but on a bigger scale, is, well, how does that manifest out in the real world? These people are becoming, like, you know, doctors and so on. Well, what if, I mean, if they got there and shouldn't have been in that position? Then we have hiring practices later on, especially at medical schools and so on now, where it's like they're being promoted on the basis of race. And I hope a lot of that is going away, at least it should be. But we're all aware that we've had these hiring practices, these preferentialisms, for a while, and that affects both things like patient care and obviously in other fields of life as well, but it also affects the way that people perceive the Black professional. Like, if you were, well, if I was a Black person who wanted to be taken seriously in a profession, then I wouldn't want these kinds of systems in place that would lead people to doubt whether or not I was qualified to get there. So, like, let's say, you know, you have, we'll stay with the doctor example. Let's just say you have a complicated illness or constellation of symptoms, and you want good quality care, and you want to know that the person, you know, that you're seeing, this doctor, is the most qualified and the best, frankly, that you can get access to. Well, if you were making the decision based only upon, you know, physical characteristics, well, you'd want to get the straight Asian male, right? Because he would be the person who had to fight the hardest to get actually hired, to get all the way through the academic system, and then to get his job. He had to be kind of amazing. So he's the guy. But like, you do see that, like, you saying, well, this person, do we want that kind of doubt to be like, okay, this is a Black woman doctor, like, maybe she's great, or maybe she got hired because of all these different step up systems that went against, you know, what she was actually capable of. Like, if you were Black, I don't think you'd want those systems in place that cause everyone to doubt your actual, you know, innate ability. That actually sets you up for a type of failure, without a doubt. Okay, let's continue. Okay, and then we come down here. University administrators are now grappling with the challenge of maintaining diversity on their campuses in the absence of race-conscious admissions. Why? Like, why is it so essential that we maintain diversity of race specifically? I'm not really confident that that is something that we should be aiming for specifically. And obviously, I'm not saying that we need to segregate the schools. I'm just saying that, I don't think that diversity in itself of race is a good thing necessarily. Um, like, do we, like, why? I fail to find people who give anything other than just straight emotional arguments for that question, for the question of why. But it's kind of elaborated here, actually. There's Roberts here who said the commitment is 100% still there. We promise. Students at all schools benefit from going to college with students who are different from themselves. And this is the that same kind of notion of, well, diversity is our strength, and we need some racial dynamics here at place. It's like, okay, but do they? Um, how do students benefit from going to college with students who are different from themselves, racially speaking? Because what you actually see, I mean, on colleges and just everywhere else in life, is that people gather on the basis of what they share in common. Remember, we started out at the very top of this article with the group Cis to Cis, where Black women on college campuses wanted to be with other Black women to bond. Okay. Um, I mean, is that bad for them because they should actually be interacting more with other racial groups? Is that bad for them because it's not particularly diverse? I mean, what people actually do in the real world is that they bond with other people on the basis of similarity, not on the basis of difference. And that's not purely racial. Like, if you're in a room with people, you're probably going to be, most drawn to those who you have something in common with, whether it's an academic success, or academic failure, or if you share the same subject matter, if you're, we're talking in college terms, or even if you're not talking in college terms, the fact that you share this common interest can be a source of friendship. And so it's this whole thing about how we should just push for, interracial dynamics that's forced. It's like, if you just let people in who, merit the position. And I'm not saying you can't, give help to those who haven't, struggled more or had more hurdles and financial hardships and all of that, which I don't think is as racial specific as some people like to make it out to be. Some of those who struggle in Appalachia, I think, are some of the poorest in our nation. But I digress. Um, Instead, I think what makes sense is just letting people, be people and associate with who they want to associate with, and some of that, will be cross-racial. But you don't have to force that, like you're engaging in some non-stop social experiment with students. And that has, become our sort of focus here. That's the entire focus of so much of this. All right, let's keep going. Scrolling down. And then you've got this other quote. The idea that you would place restrictions on who can or who cannot be admitted to our PWIs, that is, predominantly white institutions, I think is bad for our country. Okay. No one is placing restrictions on who can and who cannot be admitted to our universities. I mean, the fact that they called it PWIs, or predominantly white institutions, is kind of nauseating, honestly. No one's talking about the predominantly Black institutions as if they're a bad thing, just because they have a certain racial group that predominates. Like America is still, I think, more than 50% white, so you're gonna expect that you're gonna have some predominantly white institutions. But anyway, this so much of this is just based upon like a false narrative and an entirely false understanding of what just changed in terms of the Supreme Court ruling and what anybody wants to move toward. No one's placing restrictions on who can get into colleges, which is what they're saying, on the basis of race. What they're doing is removing restrictions. they're removing race completely as a factor in admission. That's not the same thing as saying, hey, because you're black, you're not allowed in. They're just saying, because you're black doesn't affect whether or not you can get in. It's a hugely different moral way of looking at things. And the classical liberals used to call it colorblindness, but nowadays that's even that, I think they use as a slur to describe a mindset that they tend to hate. But all of this is just so much based upon their false understanding of what is and also what should be. Like their understanding is we should use race as much as possible, but only in one direction, to aid certain racial groups who they claim to be victimized, but who the very basis of that law would prove are not actually victimized, but instead giving preferential treatment. And then we should force interactions between racial groups to ensure a sort of 50-50 dynamic, even though that isn't reflected in the mainstream population. So I'm not sure how you're going to get those numbers exactly up. It just doesn't work. None of it does. And because it doesn't work, they can use that failure, that orchestrated failure, to argue something that also isn't true, which is that we live in an oppressive, evil, patriarchal, white-run country. And it just kind of goes on from there. But all of this is fraudulent. It is a good thing for people to care about their academic success and to focus on it and merit, and for people not to think that their race is in any way going to be used as a factor in whether or not they can succeed. Like that is a good that we ought to be celebrating and be glad that we're moving toward.